to be honest, a lot of it is really pretty. A lot of it is really pretty depressing. My recent talks have had titles like "Attack of the Hope Police," "Delusional Optimism at the End of the World," "Horrific Ways to Save the Planet," and they describe in gory details basically the way we're fucking up the Earth and how unlikely it is that we are ever going to pull out of this particular nosedive. They involve slides like this one, which is from a talk I gave way back in 2017. And you will see that one of the things I predicted back then was that we were going to get hit by a series of rolling urban pandemics starting basically any time now. So, I got that one right. Yay me. I guess we'll wait and see whether or not my other predictions, which are actually just cribbed from other people's predictions, of course, come true in due time. Lately, I've been sort of trying to broaden out a bit, explore both in my short stories and in my talks possible solutions to the problems that we are facing. And since our crisis, the crisis that we're currently facing, generally seems to track back to human nature, I've been exploring the possibilities of actually changing human nature at the molecular level. This particular slide is from a talk I gave just last year. And it suggests that if we amp up the brain's production of a particular molecule called nociceptin, we might actually be able to mitigate and counteract the neurochemistry involved in human greed. Now, I would have been more than happy to produce the same kind of stuff this time around. But I'm getting the increasing impression that audiences have had maybe a little too much near-term realism for the time being. So today I'm going to give a talk that starts off in the same general ballpark thematically, but is actually way more batshit than usual. It's way more speculative. It's got a downright galactic perspective. If you didn't know me, you might even call it hopeful. Again, because it's so hand-wavy, it's not going to rely as much on peer-reviewed literature, but again, I'm guessing that's a good thing, right? So here we go. Talk is The End of Need, Cognitive Trends in Starfaring Species. And we're going to start off with these two axioms from Cixinlu's Three-Body Problem Dark Forest trilogy. And this is these axioms are the basis of his Dark Forest model, which concludes basically that all intelligent species in the galaxy must ultimately end up shooting at each other. You're probably familiar with it. That's a pretty bleak model. And I generally am a huge fan of bleak, but when I first encountered these, I had some problems. I accepted the first point, survival is the primary need of civilization, sure. But not the second. Why, after all, does civilization need to expand and grow? That's the credo of the bacterium. I'll grant you it's also the credo of humanity, up to this point anyway. I'll even admit it's a credo built into all of life. I mean, it's an inevitable result of evolution through natural selection. Maximize your fitness, spread your genes, be fruitful and multiply. But the thing about natural selection is it is blind. It is utterly without foresight. People crave sugar, for example, because 50,000 years ago, calorie-rich foods were an extremely rare and precious resource. So evolution outfitted us with this craving to ensure that we would gobble up all we could find. And that worked just great then. But there's no way for the genes to look ahead a few thousand years and say, whoa, someday we are going to be living in a society where sugar is everywhere, and this whole sweet tooth thing is going to cause obesity and tooth rot and diabetes and all sorts of things that decrease fitness. There's no way genes can do that. Natural selection only cares about what works right now. Now, you can make a strong case, and I've argued this myself a number of times, that now is basically still all we really care about, that we dither about climate change and the ongoing destruction of the biosphere, because when it comes right down to it, we don't have much more foresight than our genes do. I mean, sure, we've got this nice shiny neocortex sitting on top of the grungy primitive brainstem, but we don't use it so much to control our instincts as to make really elaborate and self-serving excuses for our instincts. So we're not fighting over resources, we're spreading democracy. We're not mate guarding, we are protecting the sanctity of marriage. Once you strip away the rebranding, our motives and actions are pretty much the same as that of any other mammal on the planet, although granted, our actions have a lot more impact. Still, the fact that we don't control our instincts doesn't mean that we can't in principle. Can we not even imagine a civilization that lives within its means, that lives in a steady state with its environment? You could certainly make an argument for Lou's point number 2 based, on all of human history. But that still doesn't make it inevitable. So that was my reaction when I first read this trilogy. I accepted the first of his axioms. I questioned the second, but I admit that my thinking has changed over time. Now I also question point number 1. Why, after all, should a civilization want to survive? Now you may think, oh, I got ahead of myself there. You may think that that question is so obvious it barely even deserves an answer. I mean, why does anything want to survive? Because natural selection weeded out everything that didn't. Darwin's struggle for existence has been shaping life on this planet for over 4 billion years. Every evolved being has an inbuilt survival drive, or more precisely, a drive for genetic persistence. Now, evolved beings is key here. There we go. Evolved beings is why I have always been really kind of skeptical of the whole robot uprising scenario. Science fiction has been serving this up to us time and time again. AIs wake up, we panic, pull the plug, Skynet fights back out of self-defense. It was an old premise before most of us were even born. And it doesn't really make a lot of sense, because survival instincts don't just magically pop out of nowhere when something becomes self-aware. These things are evolved features. They're shaped and refined over millions of years. So even if an AI does develop self-awareness, there's no a priori reason why it should give a rat's ass whether it lives or dies, unless we explicitly program something like a brainstem into it. Now, we, on the other hand, we have got survival instincts and biases up the wazoo. This is a famous quote from Steven Pinker, and he points out that brains are not truth detectors. They are survival engines. They were shaped by natural selections. They are wired to promote fitness. If believing a lie helped you maximize your fitness throughout our evolutionary history, then chances are today your brain will continue to believe that lie with all its furry little metaphorical heart. Now, the really obvious case in point is the selfish gene one. My gene's the most important thing. My baby is the center of the universe. Nothing is more important than family. And it's trivially easy to see how evolution would have outfitted us to believe that kind of delusory thing, even though we know now statistically that parents are more miserable on an emotional level than non-parents are. That's one case in point. Here's another one. Give somebody the choice between $5 today or $20 in 2 weeks. Weirdly, most people will go for $5 today, the smaller, more immediate payoff. Now, the technical term for this is hyperbolic discounting. And it actually makes sense in unpredictable environments because, who knows, a lot can happen in 2 weeks. Maybe the guy who promised you the 20 gets hit by a bus or something in the meantime. But the flip side of this is that the further away something is in time, the less real it becomes to us. And this makes it almost impossible to really internalize long-term consequences. Now we can, imagine long-term consequences, no problem. Hell, we can imagine sapient raccoons with gun fetishes. We do that for fun, but we don't really believe that shit. Not down in the brainstem where we make all of our actual decisions. We literally don't even believe in our own mortality. This paper came out just last year. They found a kind of denial switch that throws the brain into cognitive neutral when it's confronted with evidence or even the very concept of its own mortality. So it's not really all that surprising that when you give somebody the choice between a slightly lower standard of living today or absolute disaster in 10 or 20 years, they'll almost always opt for environmental disaster because that just doesn't seem as real to us as the emotional immediate trauma of having to like pay for mass transit instead of driving your car everywhere. Now, these are just a few big cognitive biases, but there are literally hundreds of these things. Wired, inwired, xenophobia, jealousy, confirmation bias, cherry picking, backfire effect. It has even been argued that modern religious beliefs have their roots in pattern matching error, category error, arising from ancient predator avoidance responses. Now, all of these things in this codex, they were all adaptive at some times. They all helped us to survive. Some of them still do. But also, by definition, they bias and they distort your view of reality. Every one of these things helps you survive or helped you survive by lying to you. And this produces a really interesting choice. You can either have a relatively clear, unbiased view of the world, or you can care whether you live or die. You can have objectivity, or you can have a survival drive. You cannot optimize along both those axes simultaneously. Keep that in mind, and we'll be coming back to it. So basically, we are enthralled to a suite of gut feelings that urge us to act on their urges and ignore the consequences because to the gut, the future just isn't real. We watch ourselves destroying the world, and we know on some level that we really should do something about it, but somehow we never get around to it. Of course, some figure if we destroy this world, we can always move to the one next door. That's the explicit motive underlying Elon Musk's Martian colonization initiative. Now, Musk thinks we have to get off this planet to avoid human extinction. He does not, to my knowledge, address the fact that the most likely cause of human extinction is going to be human behavior, and that's going to be the thing that we take with us no matter what planet we end up on. He seems more worried about robot uprisings, ironically. Still, for what it's worth, I think we could well be on Mars before long. I mean, hell, they're still talking about sending tourists around the moon as early as 2023. They're talking about putting a hotel into orbit for rich people as early as 2027. So, yeah, I think the ultra-rich will be on Mars anyway. They'll probably colonize the whole solar system, assuming that civilization does not collapse in the meantime. Personally, my money is on that second thing, but we're trying to be upbeat here. We're trying to be optimistic. So we colonize the solar system. Then what? Well, then, in keeping with this whole upbeat vibe, we go interstellar, which, as you all know, is going to make interplanetary travel look like a stumbling, demented baby step. The timescales, the logistical problems, the technological demands and risks for interstellar travel are exponentially greater. Now, this is a science fiction convention, so you guys all know the potential travel modes that have been cooked up over the years. If you go really slow, it takes you centuries to get anywhere. And that means you either have to build generation ships or you have to put people into hibernation. Generation ships, to start off with. Basically a propelled city in space. It's outfitted with an ecosystem that keeps hundreds or thousands of people alive for hundreds or thousands of years. People whose descendants we really, really hope will still be on board with the agenda that their great-great-great-great-great-grandparents got on board with. There are innumerable possible failure points for such a mission. Speaking just to the ecological component, and as a former biologist, let me say, the only way I would put my kids on a ship like that would be if I really didn't like them very much. Now, hibernation is a lot simpler. And it's also a lot closer to realization. We recently discovered that you can actually reduce suspended animation in rodents by 90% just by introducing hydrogen sulfide into their breathing mix. But even a crew metabolizing at 10% is going to rack up a really heavy load on life support over centuries of travel time. Also, cosmic radiation damages DNA. So your hibernators are going to end up at their destination with their genomes slashed to ribbons. Or they're going to have to wake up periodically en route to allow their own cellular repair mechanisms to fix that damage, again at normal metabolic rates. Or they're going to have to ship out loaded down with tungsten or depleted uranium or some other kind of really heavy radiation shielding, all of which increases mass and life support demands and travel time. The other option is don't go slow. You could try going really fast, get close enough to light speed. And while, thousands of years may pass in the real world, to a subjective traveler, you could cross the galaxy in just a few years. Problem with that is that the faster you go, the harder you run into atoms of interstellar hydrogen. Now, slow speeds, that's not a problem because there's only like one or two of those things every cubic centimeter. But before you even hit half of light speed, those particles would be blue shifted enough to melt your ship on contact, long before you reach any kind of a velocity that manifests in significant time dilation effects. Now, all of these problems, of course, come down to mass, the cost of moving all that meat, the cost of moving all the life support equipment needed to keep it alive. And the obvious solution is to get rid of the meat, save yourself all that shielding and all that food and water and air, save yourself the life supports equipment, strip away all the hardware that forces you to accelerate skyscrapers in space, digitize yourself basically, send electrons instead. So personality upload, it's basically all the rage in transhumanist circles these days. For the most part, I've never really bought into it myself. I think certain transhumanists may not entirely have internalized the fact that consciousness upload won't actually be a transfer. It will be a copy-paste. Best case scenario, a copy-paste where the original just rots and dies normally, like any other meat. Worst case scenario, copy-paste with a delete original tacked on the end. And as the original being deleted, I would not generally be cool with that. However, way back in the 1980s, a dude called Hans Moravec posited an upload scenario that maybe I could get behind. He asks us to imagine a meat brain being replaced by silicon, one neuron at a time. At what point do you stop being human? He wonders, when the first neuron gets swapped out, when half the brain is gone, half the brain is silicon. To people with cochlear implants, given that part of their brain has already been replaced, are they somehow less human than the rest of us? There's a continuity to this process. There's something that makes me realize that if you change gradually enough, one cell at a time subjectively, you never stop being you in any real sense. So I have come to grudgingly accept that mind uploading, assuming that it's even possible, which is a huge if, of course, is not something we would reject out of hand. Might even become popular. And once that happens, cost of interstellar travel becomes almost trivial. I mean, obviously you can travel much faster because you're accelerating much smaller payloads. You've got spaceships the size of an iPhone instead of a skyscraper. But probably more realistically, you can also amble along as slowly as you like with your system clock turned down so that centuries pass to your digital self like moments. And if you absolutely have to indulge your brainstem expansionist tendencies, fine. Bring along the specs for building organic people and then print them from raw materials at the other end when you find a suitable world. In fact, sending digital facsimiles between stars would be so much cheaper and so much easier than sending meat that we could reasonably assume that any starfaring species faced with the same laws of physics and the same constraints will end up going the digital route. Now, chances are I'm still not telling you anything new. I mean, I myself have been reading stories about digital people in tiny spaceships since the turn of the century, before the turn of the century. But take it one step further. With digitization, You gain the potential not just to upload your brain, but to edit it. I'm not just talking about the old hoary SF thought experiments, about hacking memories or hacking senses. Can I trust what I see? Can I trust what I remember? I'm talking about something much more radical. I'm talking about turning ourselves into an entirely new cognitive species. And we do that by getting rid of the brainstem. I'm using brainstem, by the way, here as kind of a loose term to refer to all sorts of basement level instincts and cognitive biases. They don't necessarily have to be located in the medulla oblongata. It's just a good term. Anyhow, get rid of the brainstem. And why not? I mean, those instincts served us really well back when we were at the mercy of our environment, when we were kept in check by diseases and predators and falling off of cliffs and starvation. But now the environment is at our mercy, and now we are at the mercy of our instincts. They really, I think, pose far more of a threat than a benefit. So if we're going to upload into silicon anyway, why not get rid of them? Why just copy when we can optimize? You wouldn't even have to deal with that gut level revulsion that most of us feel, that desire to protect the self. I mean, nobody wants to cut out their own brainstem. I mean, God damn it, Martha, that just ain't natural, right? But taking out the brainstem of a digital copy of yourself, I mean, why not? For science, right? Now, you might say that we would be stripping away all the things that essentially make us human by doing this. I would say we'd be doing exactly the opposite. We would be stripping away all the things that make us mammals or vertebrates even. The exclusively human part is what we would be leaving intact. And you might also say, wait a second, that whole brainstem thing, that has a lot to do with survival instincts, right? Without those instincts, we'd be like those impotent AIs I was talking about a few slides back. We wouldn't care whether we lived or died. And my response to that is, yeah, so what? Before you get the wrong idea, I am not arguing here against survival in principle. I wouldn't expect you to buy into that, even if I did, because your brainstem obviously wouldn't let you. But even if you adhere to the idea that human survival is a good thing, that it's something that should be actively pursued, dragging a bunch of feces-hurling, tribalistic monkey instincts across the galaxy, is not necessarily the best way to achieve that goal. These instincts compromise rational thought. They prevent us from seeing the world as it is. And they might not even be necessary, because if you spread yourself widely enough, nothing short of a galaxy-wide catastrophe can take you out. And when you measure those odds against the risks posed by dragging our caveman instincts into the future with us, it is not clear to me that keeping the brainstem is the safer alternative. Unlike the laws of physics, the laws of natural selection are probably universal, which means that any potential aliens out there will almost certainly have evolved the same short-sighted survival drives that we are afflicted with here on Earth. Once they have developed advanced technology, they too will have to wrestle with the destructive potential of those instincts. That's one of the great filters commonly proposed to explain the Fermi Paradox, in fact, that we haven't seen any aliens because they all lost that struggle and wiped themselves out. This is a screen grab of the latest attempt to estimate the number of intelligent technological species in the Milky Way, and it contains an explicit variable to account for the possibility of self-annihilation. Now, if aliens do avoid this filter, if they survive long enough to contemplate interstellar travel, then they will be faced with the same physical constraints on mass and acceleration that we will be. So these are a couple of postulates that I have come up with. Firstly, that all technological civilizations go through a crisis phase in which primitive cognitive processes designed for short-term local situations influence the use of advanced technologies with global long-term impacts. Deprecation of those impulses will be vital to survival. Number two, by necessity, StarFaring civilizations are able to copy individual minds onto digital substrates. So think of point number 1 as a filter. Think of point number 2 as a bottleneck. I am not calling them axioms because they are extremely arguable. We don't even know if mind uploading is possible yet. But if these two conditions are met, it might be possible to classify starfaring civilizations along the same thematic lines that Nikolai Kardashev did. Remember the Kardashev scale, which measures civilizations in terms of energy consumption. As class 1 civilization can harness all the energy that falls on their planet. Class 2 civilization can harness all the energy of its local star, basically your Dyson sphere civilization. Class 3 can harness the energy output of an entire galaxy. I've come up with something that I call the Moravec metric, and it's kind of thematically parallel, but instead of talking about energy exploitation, it is an index of cognitive modification. And I have come up with 4 different phases that we might go through. The first are the brain stems, naturally evolved organic beings like us. They're constrained by both the filter and the bottleneck. So we're both limited to a single solar system and are in constant danger of wiping ourselves out because apocalyptic machinery is being run by caveman brains. Class 2, the uploaded, digitized organic minds. They have not been edited, but they have been uploaded. So we've got past the bottleneck, but not the filter. So what you got here are caveman brains with interstellar flight capabilities. We can spread out through the universe, but the brainstem is always lurking around just off stage to ruin things for us. Class 3 are the modified. They're uploaded and edited. They have gotten past the bottleneck and they're making some serious progress on the filter. Perhaps they keep their survival instincts around to keep them sharp in matters of survival and persistence, but they've dialed them back so that the brainstem acts more as an advisor than a master. In other words, they are what we only pretend to be. They are in control of their instincts. And maybe we'll stop there. I mean, I think that would be a great place for us to stop as a galactic civilization. But I've added one more classification just in case, and I call them the purified. They have passed through both the bottleneck and the filter. The modified have learned to control their instincts. The purified don't have any instincts to control. And since instincts, by definition, exist to promote the spread of selfish genes, these beings are selfless. They're not driven to fight or to compete for resources. They may still possess a sort of curiosity, insofar as curiosity is an upper brain function. They may even still be, I would say they would still be capable of actual pleasure, insofar as not all the pleasure response systems of the brain are in the brainstem. We have a pleasure system, it turns out, in the orbital frontal cortex, and it's connected to high-level analysis and decision-making. So we can literally get off on problem solving, which is pretty cool. So the purified would be inclined to go on existing, as long as there are mysteries explored and unknowns to plunge. But, but if not, no big deal. They've seen the universe with clear eyes. They've made that choice between objectivity and survival. These are beings which, quite simply, have no needs. They are divorced from natural selection. If they survive, which they probably do, it's not because they struggled to survive. It's because they are so cosmopolitan, they are so ubiquitous throughout the galaxy that they're invulnerable now to extinction level events. In Darwinian terms, the purified don't even qualify as life forms. Now, the mindset of such beings, I think, would obviously be really difficult to relate to. But if we cavemen had to come up with one word to describe them, it would have to reflect their inability to suffer or to need or to want, and their consequent complete lack of motivation to inflict suffering on anything else. And I suppose you could call that indifference, but I think it would be more nuanced than that. Perhaps we could call it a sort of kindness. if humanity ever reaches that stage, maybe we will have finally learned to be kind. How's that for a happy ending? That's all I got. Now I'm going to unshare my screen.
Absolutely wonderful, Peter. It's incredible to see you as an optimist.
Have I uncanceled my screen, or
Yes,
are you not seeing?
We can see you loud and well,
okay,
clear and sharp now. I mean,
I do not know what the protocol is now. I don't know if there are questions or if I just go away.
Let's wait just a moment. Maybe there are some questions. So, anyone questions? Just talk, Septi.
Hi. Yeah, hi. So, what do you think of the idea? Because I kind of personally feel attached to my needs, but if that were to happen, then, well, something. If I removed, became this kind of purified being, that would I feel no longer be me. So. If I personally want to survive and I got to the digitized stage, maybe an option for me to keep existing would be for these purified beings to kind of keep me in check, like that. So I could keep.
What do you suggest? Are you suggesting that some aliens go up to the purified stage and then they can sort of act as zookeepers to keep the rest of us in line?
Yeah, well, not necessarily aliens, but maybe just kind of post-humans. Just maybe the purified me would keep the kind of the basic the ape version of me in check, so that I don't do anything destructive, but I can still lead a happy life. I don't need to harm people or destroy stuff to be happy.
Yeah, I mean that's the. I mean, you've kind of nailed the fundamental paradox here. We want to survive, but the things that make us want to survive are the things that threaten us with extinction now that we have advanced technology. And it's perfectly natural to want to protect the self. So yeah, I mean, I suspect that if this does happen, and again, like admittedly, this is just batshit freewheeling what if-ism, okay? But if this does happen, I suspect what happens is probably something along the lines of what you might, of what you've suggested, that there will be, I mean, our digitized self will go off and persist, and we will stay back on this planet and either destroy it or not. We will become irrelevant in the scheme of things. But let's not forget that the prefrontal cortex is a part of us too. And I think that should be celebrated. I think that part of you might want to survive. So it's not a question perhaps of you wanting to survive and you being the brainstem, although that's pretty much the way it's played out these days. It's there are two parts of us, and both parts might want to survive, but one part actually can do that constructively, and the other part does it self-destructively. Wouldn't it be great if we could all sort of make that choice?
Yeah, but if I can make copies of myself, I would. I mean, as I am now with the brainstem and everything, I would gladly put my purified version in charge of things with the other purified beings, so that we don't destroy the planet, but we can kind of keep on living and enjoying life essentially.
Could you trust your purified self to act in your personal interest, though? I mean,
it would be kind.
Yeah, I mean, there is a kindness in the sense that they don't want. I mean, if you take, this is something I played around with in a couple of my stories too. If you take the closest thing that I've been able to come up with as axiomatic, is that suffering is bad, and that it would be good to minimize the amount of suffering. So if that's your metric of kindness, then it actually follows. I mean, there's a movement called the human extinction movement, which argues on philosophical grounds that because life is suffering, and because something that does not exist can't suffer, and because when you actually look at the biology of pain and pleasure, the suffering always in natural systems outweighs happiness. The best way to minimize suffering is for our species to go gently and quietly extinct. Certainly the massive, 70 to 130,000 species a year that we seem to be wiping off the face of the planet would be better off without us. And the problem with that argument, I mean, it's a tempting argument. The problem with that argument, of course, is that everything suffers. So ultimately, you go down that rabbit hole. The way to minimize suffering in the universe is to cleanse the universe of all life. And who knows, maybe that is the ultimate good. I don't know. It's one of the things I've been playing around with in omniscience, but I'm not quite sure which side of that extreme I'm going to end up falling down on.
Okay, so do you want me to read the questions from the chat, or?
Yeah, okay. I'm sort of skimming back over the chat too, and a lot of them are obviously in Polish, which I do not understand.
No. Don't go to the beginning. Go to the start from the bit where there is "Thank you. This was enlightening and entertaining," and after that you have questions.
Oh, okay. Hello, Anna. Cognitive biases somewhere. Yeah. The cognitive biases slide. That's just go to Wikipedia. And
someone linked that. Yeah.
And look for cognitive biases, and it gives you that codex. Where are we? Stupid mouses.
Okay, maybe I will read the questions. So Kitku wrote, do you think if we reach any of those levels, all of the humanity will decide to transcend to this level, or is it possible there will be simultaneously people on several different levels because of choice?
Yeah, I think, for one thing, there will be people with religious beliefs that will find this absolutely blasphemous. There will be a lot of people who do not go for this. And as one of the previous questioners pointed out, we like our brain stems. I like having needs because I get to fulfill them, right? The joy that you get from, people don't generally get joy out of the prospect of losing 18 years of their life raising sulky, squalling, and generally ungrateful offspring, but we all really like sex. So nature kind of figured out how to give us that short-term payoff, and then we get stuck with the babies afterwards. But we like all that stuff. But the reason we like all that stuff is because if we didn't have offspring. That's just the way natural selection works. Natural selection programs us to strive for things that ultimately are destructive. So to be natural, there's all sorts of natural behaviors that are really, really negative in a technological civilization. So yeah, I myself don't know how I would feel being a cold and disembodied intellect. I take a real visceral pleasure myself in, my God, cats, not being able to scoop up a cat, not being able to sort of go to a pond and just sort of check out the various flora, not being able to go for a run on the trail. These are all purely organic pleasures that bring me joy, but they bring me joy because they're a trick. They're all tricks designed to make me spread my genes. And I've managed to short circuit that spready part of the genes by the simple act of getting my tube snipped. But yeah, I think you've got, if you want to just continue to live in the moment, I think that's what most people would do. But again, the reason I'm bringing this up in terms of starfaring and interstellar travel is because this is not something that I think we are likely to do here on Earth. But if we want to travel to the stars, assuming that digital uploads are possible, that might be the only economic way to do it. The only relatively risk-free way of doing it, other than sending the meat. It's certainly going to be cheaper than sending the meat if it's even possible. So in a situation like that, you're going to be doing it anyway. And it won't be we all change. It will be we send out copies of ourselves because we can't go ourselves. And we just sit here in whatever paradise or whatever hell we end up making for ourselves. And our digital offspring go off and colonize the galaxy. So yeah, I'm convinced the only way it would work, really, given human nature, is if we pretty much stayed the same, but our descendants were better.
Okay, so next question, you part of answered, but I will read it anyway. I think once you, NSV writes, I think once you go digital, it's not you, it's next version of human civilization. You don't need to copy humans, you need to develop AI that will have human-rooted culture and values.
Well, A, that's not a question, that's a comment. B, I agree with everything except the last sentence. The problem with human-rooted cultures and values is that they are based on caveman instincts. I mean, we got to draw a distinction between morals and ethics, right? Morals are the, nothing is more important than family. And morals are gut feelings that natural selection has fitted us out with. Ethics are more along the lines of, this is the goal we're shooting for. These are the strategies we can use to attain it. Ethics and morality, I think, are frequently at odds. And the example I always like to choose is, or to illustrate this point, is there's a paper came out a few years back showing that if you lesion the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, you basically immunize people against trolley paradoxes. You have somebody that would actually, in a situation where their kid and somebody else's kids were in a burning building, they would rescue the other person's children if there were more of them. And that's an ethical decision, to sacrifice your own child to save a greater number of somebody else's children. That's the ethical decision. But how do you think the newspapers would play something like that? Would they say noble mother sacrifices child to save others? Or would it say monster mom leaves her own baby to burn in blazing house? The moral choice always tends to be the selfish one. And I think that's what human rooted culture is. And that's the thing I think we have to transcend. I think it would be totally counterproductive to produce a superior AI and then root it in human values, because look what human values have done to the planet so far.
I kind of expected your answer to go this way. That's why I read it, despite not being a straight question. The next is also a comment, but I will read it too because it's pretty nice. PSJ writes, there are at least two major philosophical schools of thought that posit getting rid of your needs is the road to true happiness, Stoicism and Taoism. Interesting to see when, if technology finally allows that.
Yeah.
And
yeah, no, I would be fascinated to see how this plays out.
So another comment is about that. This what Septi suggested is something like suspiciously close to a god, technologically evolved personal god.
Yeah, but it would be a god without the emotional attachment to you that it hopes. I mean, the gods that we've invented, at least in the Abrahamic religions, I can't speak to the Dharmic religions, they seem far more diffuse and I don't know, in terms of Buddhism, a lot more sane. Not that I know much about those faiths, but certainly the Abrahamic religions generally worship a god that's pretty much like us, but a lot more powerful and a lot meaner. A jealous, trickster kind of a God that gets really pissed off if you worship a golden idol, or, you know, I mean, some of the stuff, some of the Old Testament stuff that goes down with the Judeo-Christian gods are not godlike at all. So I don't even know if, because most of our gods seem to be based on us. I don't even know if the term God is applicable. We may need to come up with a different term for truly alien, emergent, and compassionate AI.
Okay, next question would be by Juliana. Do you think such a situation with a struggle of choice can cause a global civil war of sorts? Or are the natural humans just gonna die off?
I suspect, I mean, I don't think natural humans are going to die off anyway, unless, you know, an asteroid hits us or something, because there's just too many of us. I think the chances are that civilization, technological civilization, is going to collapse. And we'll probably end up going back to sort of this feudal low-tech civilization of people sort of beating each other over the head for the last tin of Spam in the ruins. Global civil war. I don't see this as being a legitimate cause for war, because really all we're saying is, hi, we're going to make copies of ourselves and send them off-world. That doesn't threaten anybody. It doesn't, as far, you know, it doesn't necessarily take resources away from anybody. It doesn't necessarily impoverish anybody. If we can keep Moore's law going long enough, it might be, you know, economically trivial to produce something with human level or greater than human level intelligence and send it off into space. So I don't see there being legitimate cause for a global war. What I do, but again, how many wars are actually fought for causes that make sense? I can see a group of people who believe that we are all born in sin because a single created woman built from somebody's rib listened to a talking snake and ate a piece of fruit, but they, having accepted the Lord Jesus, their Christ, believes that an invisible sky fairy is going to send them to space Disneyland when they die. I can see people with those kinds of beliefs being so offended by the very idea that other people are doing this, that they could start a war. Not because they are actually being threatened or endangered, but because their worldview is being threatened or endangered. It's the same reason you have people bombing abortion clinics or running planes into buildings. Not because anybody is forcing them to get an abortion, but because they just don't think anybody else should be able to do that thing because it's deeply wicked and evil and wrong. I've run into the same problem with high school teachers who've wanted to teach blind sight to their classes, and the pitchfork and torches crowd comes out because blind sight contains the word fuck. And they get upset even when I agreed to strip out all the existence, all the iterations of the word fuck, just so that this high school class down in the Bible Belt could read the book for the ideas, right? I would never do that again because it wasn't enough. The fact that this book had ever had the word fuck in it, and that now their children were reading this book. They didn't even get to the point about whether consciousness is a good thing. They didn't get to the atheist inclinations and worldviews. It was just the use of the F word, right? People like that, I can definitely see starting a war. But people like that are the reason we need to get rid of the brainstem. So 6 of one, half a dozen of the other.
So relating to the previous thing you said, you were saying that the same mechanisms that now are destroying us are the ones that are going to prevent us from seeing a creation of those versions of ourselves as a danger, basically. Because this is something that is far out in time and not immediately threatening to us.
Yeah, I mean, it may be threatening to us if we can get a few boatloads of digital personalities off world, so that the fundamentalists can't get to them. That would be great, but it would still be a whole lot of blue Mendies down here on Earth for us meat left behind.
Okay, so last two questions, and then I'm going to let you off because you need to get some rest before the next panel.
Right.
So Borsuk asked, the purified would need stimulation. They will need new things and new challenges. Will they self-destruct when they run out of it? Of the unknown to solve? Will they move one step back and voluntarily devolve?
I'm not sure I buy the basic premise. Again, needing stimulation. These things are beyond need. I don't know if we can know. It's like, that old, Thomas Nagel's philosophical treatise, What Is It Like to Be a Bat? His whole argument that there is a subjective world of experience that is inaccessible to us just because of the way our brains are wired. Except this is way, way weirder because bats are mammals and they got brain stems, and we share a lot of cognitive similarities with other mammals. This would be something that, as I said, isn't even a life form. And the reason it's not a life form is because it's not being shaped. I mean, my favorite definition of life is from Dawkins, which is information shaped by natural selection. Natural selection doesn't impact these guys anymore. So they don't have needs. I don't think they would need to be stimulated. That said, I think they would still enjoy just, if you could give them the ability to take pleasure from the sheer act of discovery, from learning things. And I think we already have that. I don't think that even require much in the way of editing. But yeah, I think maybe it's plausible that once they ran out of mysteries to explore, they might just stop. How many people has the TV comedy called The Good Place, has it made it to
yeah, it's on Netflix.
Yeah, if anybody's watched it to the end, I mean, that's basically what happens. You finally get to the good place, and at some point you've just done everything, and at some point there's nothing left to do. You have no survival drives. And I mean, it was a kind of a profound series in a lot of ways. They had an episode on trolley paradoxes that actually won the Hugo Award. And yeah, so I think you're probably right. I think at some point there would be no point to existing, and because we were not being driven to exist by pure brute instincts anymore, we wouldn't mind stopping, and that's cool.
Okay, so that answers also the next question, I think, and that's all. There are some comments on the fact that the Dukai was not translated, and people would be very interested to see your take on his works because he touched the subjects you're discussing now. He was playing a lot with that. Okay, Kitku, you have a question or comment? Please go on, and then we need to go. Let Peter go.
It's a bit of comment that's asking for comment, and you say that when people don't have needs, they will become easily bored and no longer motivated. But what about people who got so hyper focused on exploring intellectual matters that they forget about their physical needs like eating or sleeping? They are not getting bored. So is it possible that if we ditch the physiological needs, we still will have the needs of spiritual or intellectual nature?
Feel free to jump in and interrupt me because I'm not sure I heard the question. I was getting some dropout and some sort of bottom of the well gargly bits. Were you asking about people who become fixated on solving, mysteries and cool stuff to the point where they ignore their bodily needs?
Yes, and doesn't it mean that we can be still so happy with intellectual and or spiritual matters that the needs of exploring and learning can still stay even when we have fulfilled all physiological needs.
Yeah, I mean, I think to some extent that's what that little green blob in the orbitofrontal cortex slide was all about. And it's not just intellectual pursuits or grand cosmic mysteries either. My understanding is that Tycho Brahe, the astronomer, didn't he end up dying from an exploded bladder because he enjoyed gambling so much? He was playing some game and he didn't want to take a break to go have a pee, so his bladder ended up exploding. Of course, Tycho Brahe was also, like, he was an astronomer, so he also was interested in exploring cosmic mysteries. So maybe it was the same wiring in both cases, that his desire to explore mysteries and his desire to gamble kind of tapped into the same neurological reward systems. And in one case, he accomplished so much that they named a crater after him on the moon. And in the other case, his bladder exploded and he died from urine spilling out into his insides. But yeah, no, I think, again, the thing that we are motivated to, there's a misapprehension out there. And I fell into its grasp too for the longest time. It was just a couple of years ago I found out how wrong we all were, that dopamine is a pleasure molecule. And in fact, dopamine is not a molecule that produces pleasure. What dopamine does is it promotes reward-seeking behavior. It's kind of an addiction molecule. It is responsible for greed. People who compulsively scroll on Facebook are overproducing dopamine, but most of them are not very happy. They're just grimly addicted, the same way somebody is to a slot machine in a casino. So those kind of needs, I think, pretty destructive. But the thing that causes happiness is not the dopamine molecule. The thing that causes happiness is a particular neuron that neurotransmitters cause to fire. Those are the things that generate the happiness. And I see no reason why we can't do that. But at the same point, that's just basically wireheading, right? That's just plugging an electrode into your pleasure centers and sitting there eating cheese puffs until you die. And you die happy and you die without hurting anybody. But you do die and you don't live a particularly productive life. But maybe these days, living a life of pleasure without hurting somebody, maybe that's the most anyone can hope for, because we are a pretty destructive species. Now, I do think, getting back to your original thing, I do think that we can get off on problem solving and complex analysis. That's what that little pleasure center in the prefrontal cortex tells me. And it would be nice to keep that around. I would like to continue to keep that around, but only in association with finding stuff out, not in association with things like reproduction and killing the competition.
And ending on that positive note, thank you very much for the talk, Peter. It was absolutely wonderful. You're a great speaker, and it was a pleasure to listen to this and watch you, and see you in a bit less than an hour on your panel about science fiction.
I'll see you then. I'm going to scroll back over these comments here in the meantime. So don't mind me. Goodbye, everybody.
Okay.